So when you toss out an empty coffee cup, you probably don't think much about where it actually goes, right? But here's the wild thing. That everyday garbage, it is actually a highly protected international commodity. We're talking millions of tons moving across borders every single year. Welcome to this explainer on the transboundary waste crisis. Today we're diving into how trash, trade, and tariffs are on a massive, literal geopolitical collision course.
Okay, let's start with the big question. Is garbage really a protected international commodity? The short answer, yes, absolutely. Under North American trade laws, specifically the framework set up by NAFTA and now the USMCA, municipal solid waste isn't just viewed as, well, trash. It's legally classified as a tariff-free manufactured commodity. Because it's generated and collected right here in North America, it gets this preferential duty-free status. It's honestly an incredible legal loophole, and it has completely transformed how entire regions manage their waste.
And this legalist status? It has birthed a massive cross-border waste pipeline. For decades, the province of Ontario has had this huge structural dependency on U.S. landfills, mostly right across the border in Michigan. Just to put this into perspective, between 2006 and 2022, a staggering 40 million tons of garbage moved from Ontario into Michigan. 40 million. We're talking about thousands of trucks constantly rolling back and forth, making the Ontario-Michigan corridor one of the busiest, most volume-intensive waste trade routes in all of North America.
Now, why is this happening? Why send it so far away? Well, it all comes down to a single number, 36 cents. That is Michigan's remarkably low landfill tipping fee. That's the cost they charge to actually dump a ton of waste. When you compare that 36 cents to the incredibly steep costs of running a landfill in Ontario, it creates a massive financial incentive. I mean, it is just flat out cheaper for commercial and municipal groups in Ontario to load up trucks and drive them across an international border than it is to process that same trash locally.
So, you're probably wondering, why doesn't Michigan just stop it? Well, they kind of can't. The legal shield protecting this pipeline is basically airtight. First, under the harmonized tariff schedule, waste enters the U.S. totally tariff-free thanks to the USMCA. On top of that, you have the U.S. Constitution's Commerce Clause. That clause explicitly forbids states like Michigan from slapping discriminatory border taxes or higher fees on out-of-state or international waste haulers. State-level bans have literally been struck down in court because, legally, you cannot restrict interstate or international commerce, even if that commerce is garbage.
But wait, didn't they sign an agreement to stop this? Yes and no. Back in 2010, there was a deal that successfully stopped residential trash from flowing from Ontario to Michigan. But according to the Auditor General of Ontario, there's a massive loophole, and it's called IC&I waste. That stands for industrial, commercial, and institutional waste. This is the stuff collected by private haulers under private contracts. Think construction debris, commercial packaging, things like that. The provincial government has virtually no authority to stop these private shipments from leaving, so the pipeline just keeps humming along.
But here's the catch. This cross-border flow is hitting a major breaking point. It's turning into a full-blown regional crisis. Michigan is starting to push back, and hard, because they are facing a severe capacity crunch. With all this out-of-state and Canadian trash pouring in at current rates, estimates show that Michigan landfills only have about 21 years of space left. That is an environmental and logistical clock that is ticking down fast.
To fight this, Governor Gretchen Whitmer actually put forward a really dramatic executive budget proposal. The plan was to hike that tiny 36-cent tipping fee all the way up to $5 per ton. That's a 1,288% increase. The goal was twofold, really. First, deter all this out-of-state dumping by ruining the economics of it, and second, generate about $80 million in ongoing revenue to fund local environmental cleanup and recycling programs.
But, as is often the case, grand proposals hit political reality. In April of 2026, the Michigan House of Representatives passed their omnibus budget, but they formally declined to go along with the governor's fee increase. Why? A ton of political pressure. Local businesses, hospitals, schools, and industry groups were really worried that such a massive fee hike would drastically spike the cost of living and doing business in the state. So for now, that 36-cent rate remains untouched, and the borders are wide open to cheap trash.
So while Michigan is fighting over tipping fees, Ontario is basically panicking over capacity. Ontario is staring down its own severe domestic landfill crunch, something the Auditor General actually warned them about back in 2021. And with this constant geopolitical threat hanging over them, the fear that the U.S. might eventually figure out a way to slam the border shut on Canadian garbage, Ontario is getting desperate. They are trying to secure domestic space, and they're taking some pretty extreme measures to do it.
To really understand this desperation in Ontario, let's look at the York 1 Dresden landfill controversy. It's the perfect case study. Back in late October 2022, this project only needed a basic environmental screening. Fast forward to March 2024, amid massive local outrage, the province steps in and mandates a full, comprehensive 6 to 10-year environmental assessment. The company fires back with a judicial review in July. Then, in June 2025, the Ontario government just abruptly passes Bill 5, known as the Protect Ontario by Unleashing the Economy Act. This new law specifically carved out the Dresden site, completely bypassed the comprehensive environmental assessment, and fast-tracked the whole landfill expansion.
This legislative flip-flop is pretty striking, especially when you look at what Premier Doug Ford said right before it happened. In March 2024, he actually stood in front of residents and promised, if people don't want the project, it won't happen. Yet, just over a year later, his government used Bill 5 to bypass those exact same people. The official reason they gave? Emergency necessity. The government basically argued that expanding this landfill was absolutely critical to protect Ontario from the threat of U.S. tariffs and border closures targeting the waste sector.
Naturally, as you can imagine, fast-tracking a 25-acre landfill by skipping standard environmental science ignited some intense local pushback. It's actually led to a major lawsuit from local First Nations groups, including the Walpole Island First Nation, along with community residents. They're arguing that bypassing these assessments poses a severe threat to their home territories, their local environment, their drinking water, and honestly, their fundamental right to have a say in decisions that impact their way of life.
So if we take a step back and look at the big picture here, it's pretty chaotic. We have two neighboring regions deploying these drastic, completely contrasting maneuvers to deal with the exact same crisis. They are both running out of space. On one side, Michigan's executive branch is trying to heavily tax incoming waste to defend what little capacity they have left. On the other side, Ontario is using legislation to override its own environmental protections so they can dig new holes before the border shuts. Both sides are just doing whatever they feel they have to do within their own political realities.
And now, all of these intense local and provincial fights, they're elevating to the international stage. Everything is pointing toward the critical July 1, 2026 USMCA joint review. Waste management is no longer just some isolated municipal headache. It has become a major diplomatic bargaining chip. Under this renegotiation framework, environmental compliance, cross-border logistics, and that foundational legal classification of waste as a commodity, it is all on the table.
In fact, we are already seeing the treaty being actively weaponized over trash. Take a look at this formal USMCA Chapter 24 citizen submission that was filed in May 2026. It specifically alleges that Canada failed to enforce environmental laws by allowing U.S. toxic waste to be disposed of in Blainville, Quebec. These formal environmental disputes are completely transforming the waste trade. It's shifting from a logistical issue to a massive national security and trade compliance factor. Both nations are feeling this intense domestic pressure to just stop being the other country's dumping ground. And for the commercial haulers who are out there actually moving this waste today, the stakes are totally existential. With all this heightened scrutiny, cross-border logistics now rely on complex digital compliance to prove exactly where the waste came from. If that compliance fails, trucks get denied entry right at the customs checkpoints. Even worse, non-compliant loads can be hit with massive 25% unexempted tariffs. That completely erases any profit margin they might have had. And customs authorities aren't stopping there, they're even handing down retroactive fines for past shipments.
Which brings us to a final, lingering thought to close out this explainer. Over the decades, we've built this incredibly efficient, legally protected cross-border machine completely designed to hide our refuse as cheaply as humanly possible. But with landfills filling up, politicians bypassing their own environmental laws, and international trade agreements fracturing under all this strain, what happens when North America finally runs out of cheap places to hide its most protected commodity? It is this incredibly fragile intersection of international trade, legal loopholes, and sustainability. And the bill? It's rapidly coming due. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and definitely keep an eye on the space, because this waste crisis is really only just beginning.